The Wingfield estate located in St. Kitts is steeped in history. Maurice Widdowson acquired the site about 20 years ago to save it from demolition, but really only became aware of its historical value about 4 years ago when he began to clean it up.
The site is significant for more than just those reasons. It has the first examples, for example, of British masonry in the entire New World. Basically, the New World was settled in the States earlier than St. Kitts, but they built in timber there, whereas they built in stone here, the original stone coming out as ballast on the boats. Its history also is it's the first working estate in the Caribbean. Its first crops were tobacco, and they produced indigo here until a devastating hurricane in the middle of the 17th century. And we're talking about all 17th century here. This estate was established in 1623. A devastating hurricane wiped out the tobacco. The ascendancy of sugar was coming into the world trade. It was more hardy to deal with the climate and the hurricanes of the Caribbean. So they stopped tobacco in the mid-17th century and switched to sugar, and it stayed as a sugar estate until the last decade.
In light of the estate's significant historical background and the fact that Mr. Widdowson has a keen interest in history and preservation, he set upon a plan 2 years ago to share the estate's story.
It's going to be an orientation centre visited by the public on, over the centuries, how you make sugar from cane and how you make, more interestingly perhaps for people, rum from sugar. And on site we have reference to two rum distilleries. One we believe is 20th century, but the other one, interestingly enough, and the records speak for this, it is the oldest standing rum distillery left in the English-speaking Caribbean. I haven't had confirmation it's the oldest, including Santo Domingo, yet. But we discovered last year, to our amazement and sheer joy, a 17th century rum distillery that predates 1685, and it's basically intact. The masonry is intact. We don't have the copper stills and we don't have the barrels and the paraphernalia, but the masonry is absolutely intact.
When asked about the visible remaining structures, Mr. Widdowson explained what they said of the old plantation.
They tell us a number of things. One of the significant things they tell us is the methodology used over the centuries of crushing cane. For example, they started with a method that was used extensively in this region, which was animal power, animals walking in a circle, eventually using a cog system to crush cane. But they unusually, but not uniquely, switched from animal power at the late 17th century, early 18th century, to water power. They dammed the river, they diverted the water, they brought it across an aqueduct. You can probably see traces of it in the background here. This is a stone aqueduct, but the original one was timber. And they used the water power to turn a wheel, which lasted for 2 centuries. They only switched then from water power to steam power, many examples of which are around the site. And steam power then eventually became engine power, combustion engine power in the 19th century. And there are examples of all those methods used throughout the centuries on site here.
Aware of the financial support to make his dream a reality, Mr. Widdowson and his team set about looking for funding and came across the Caribbean Export Development Agency. Their application was approved and resources were utilized in critical areas.
To acquire the services of somebody that is closely associated with St. Kitts and Nevis, having lived here for over 20 years. He's a recognised historian who's written books on the history of the Caribbean. He currently lives in Halifax in Nova Scotia and done a lot of work in St. Kitts, so he was a known quantity to us, a man called David Rollinson, to be able to come down and share not only his theoretical knowledge with us, but he's a man who is practically involved in digging and archaeological digs, and he brings volunteers down to help. So our association with him took, if you like, a fantasy of ours into reality, and he started guiding us on to which masonry we should be renovating, where we should be digging holes. He brought equipment in to X-ray, so we found out where masonry was, and etc. And he's also, his connectivity with universities and archaeological schools is extensive. So he brought not just his practical and his theoretical knowledge to the table, but he also brought his connectivity to the table, and that has been invaluable. We haven't put all the signage up by any stretch of the imagination, but we put samples up around the place to see what public reaction we get, and we're happy with it. But there's more of that to come, and some of this, at the moment, the only signage that I have erected is the ones that are informative signage. But we've also got some large pieces which are site maps, pictures of how places would have looked when they were operating normally. So that is a very significant part as well.
Mr. Widdowson has only praise for CEDA, as he said without their help, he and his team would not have succeeded in filling out the various forms.
Without the help from the office in Barbados, we would never have been able to fill in the forms. So that is a pro and a con. The forms, you need a degree in English literature and science to fill some of them in, I think it's fair to say. But there was help there when we needed it. But my goodness, we needed it.
CEDA's support and willingness to help has encouraged Mr. Widdowson to consider applying for another grant. As he says, the Wingfield estate is a work in progress.
We're hoping to create an area which is going to be called a Wingfield Reflections area. And we need some very unique type of signage there, because we're going to create a reflective zone overlooking the river, which is very, very sort of relaxing and reflective, where we have the records of the slaves that worked on this estate at the time of emancipation. And I don't think those names should be forgotten, and we're going to put them on tablets in the forest around the river, and those things we are hoping to apply for some help, because they won't be signage of a temporary sort that we have currently got. I want those to be on tablets of slate or stone that will be here forever.
It is hoped that enough would have been accomplished to offer the orientation and interpretive tours by the latter part of 2011. However, if this does not happen, Mr. Widdowson says that given the keen interest that is being shown in Wingfield Estate, that people can still learn something about it from the signage in place.